אפשר להשם צדיקים יבואו גבול זה.
This week, I was reading an article about the enslavement of Israelites in Egypt and the liberation from the exile. And that article, among other things, said, "We are presented with a powerful depiction of the human spirit and its ability to endure even in the face of great adversity. The Israelites, who had been slaves in Egypt for generations, were a testament to this resilience. Life as a slave in Egypt was not an easy feat. The Israelites were subjected to physical abuse and grueling labor, and their spirits were constantly battered by the weight of their oppression. It would have been easy for them to give up hope, but they did not. They held onto their faith in God and to the promise that one day they would be freed." So I read it and I thought to myself, wait a second. This is weird because Parashat Vayera actually teaches the opposite. So this is what it says. But when Moshe told this God promises of liberation to the Israelites, they would not listen because of their crushed spirit and difficult toil. The verse, to me, looks like they totally lost hope. They would not listen to Moshe because they did not believe anymore that they could be saved. And this crushing of their spirit, it had a clear reason. The first time Moshe delivered the message of the redemption, that redemption was near, the Israelites were convinced, they believed it, and they were excited, they trusted Moshe, they had hope. And the previous parsha of the previous week we read, "Then Moshe and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron repeated all the words that God had spoken to Moshe, and he performed the signs in the sight of those assembled, and the assembly was convinced when they heard that God had taken note of Israelites and that God had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage." But what happened after that was that Pharaoh, instead of granting freedom to Israelites, demanded more and more hard labor from them. This is a quote again. "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourself wherever you can find it, but there shall be no decrease whatever in your work." Then the overseers of the Israelites, they actually came to Pharaoh and they cried and they said, "Why do you deal thus with your servants?" And he said, "You're lazy. That is why you say, 'Let us go.'" Now, did Pharaoh really believe that Israelites were lazy? Probably not. Well, he was a manipulator. He knew exactly how to crush people's spirits. He demonstrated to them that their hopes are futile. The promises of Moshe are lies, and he occupied them with the work that did not leave a space for reflection on the situation. Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Moshe ibn Attar, who lived in 17th and 18th century, and he's one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent rabbis of Morocco. He comments on this verse and he says, "The people had good reason for becoming impatient on their fate, because when Moshe had come, had given them hope that their liberation was close at hand, that had given them a new and broader perspective on life. Now when Pharaoh had decreed additional hardships, their minds could concentrate only on how to cope with immediate and even worse situation." So they were busy fulfilling this debilitating and mind-numbing task of gathering straw and making bricks, and they simply didn't have the mental capacity to analyze the situation and to sustain hope. They were also frightened because the taskmasters punished them for not fulfilling the work. And this is a powerful method of controlling people, and Torah introduces, I believe, one of the first accounts in the history that is written down of how tyrant can manipulate people. And nowadays, this phenomenon has a name. It's called learned helplessness, and it's a psychological phenomenon in which an individual learns to feel helpless in a particular situation as a result of repeated experience of failure or inescapable adversity. This condition is characterized by a sense of powerlessness and belief that one's actions have no effect on the outcome of a situation. The concept of learned helplessness was first introduced by Martin Seligman, who is a Jewish American psychologist in 1960s. I don't know if he drew inspiration from the Torah or not, but he did a series of experiments, and then in these experiments, the individuals were, by individuals, I mean animals. I'm not going to tell you exactly what were the experiments, but they were repeatedly exposed to an inescapable aversive stimulus, and over time they learned to accept the negative stimulus and stop trying to escape it, even when given opportunity to do so. So our Hebrew ancestors experienced these traumatic events, such as physical and emotional abuse, and developed learned helplessness as a result of feeling powerless to escape the situation. However, it's important to know that this condition is not irreversible. There are several interventions and therapies that have been shown to be effective to treating learned helplessness, and this they are aimed to help individual to find new coping mechanisms and to change the patterns of negative thoughts. And so in a way, though in a very extreme way, God offered such therapy by performing miracles that show to Israelites the situation can be changed and that they were not hopeless and helpless. Know that it wasn't just one miracle, but a series of events, because learned helplessness occurs over time after repeated failure and failure and failure. So one needs repeated success to relearn own strengths. And that is the beauty and power of the Torah. It teaches us about the trap of learned helplessness and how to escape this trap and escape slavery. If you have not experienced that, the learned helplessness, it means that you have a happy life. But tyrants and modern pharaohs continue to appear in our world, and yet and again they employ the same methods to subdue people and to break their spirits. And you know how I love to talk about Ukraine, but today for a change, let me talk about Russia, a way less popular country these days. And this is the country where I was born, and I spent my childhood there, and I know a lot about it. I have to say that I was always very affectionate of Russia, and I loved it in a very patriotic way, perhaps because I was brainwashed since a very young age. I'm actually not kidding, because it's this very specific education of how to train children to be patriotic. And maybe you don't know that about me, but I never wanted to leave Russia. I did not want to leave my city where I grew up. And I loved my Jewish community there, and I was very attached to it, and I wanted to serve it. And however, my life trajectory, it was just leading me further and further away from it. And first I moved to Moscow, which is, by the way, 8,500 kilometers, 8,500 kilometers from my city to Moscow, and it's more than 5,000 miles, I believe. And I wanted to study Judaism, and I kind of exhausted all learning opportunities in my city. But I was always very adamant about my desire for coming back home. I was like, no, I'm going back home. My destiny is there. I was born there for a reason, and I want to serve my community. Then I moved to Moscow. Then I moved to Sweden, because there was nothing more for me to learn in Moscow. But I was saying the same thing. Now I was saying, I'm going back to Russia. This is my country, my Jews. And does that sound familiar to you? When the situation in Russia made it frankly dangerous for me to live there, I moved to Ukraine. And now you hear the same thing. I'm convinced that I will go back to Ukraine. So that continues. We'll see how that unfolds. So why did it become dangerous to go to Russia? And what does it have to do with learned helplessness? I was born in late Soviet Union, and my formative years, they happened during the period that it was called 10 years of democracy. And that was in the 90s when the USSR collapsed and the country was full of hope for a better future. We had a democratic chosen president and real free speech, and there was no political oppression. We really thought that the authoritarian, horrible past was behind us. Pretty much like Israelites were very excited about the good news that Moshe was going to liberate them. But in the year 2000, Putin became president, and he still is. That is 23 years, more than a half of my life. It's the same president. And I swear from the first time I saw him on TV, I hated him. It was very clear that he was going to be our next pharaoh. And the association between Russia and Egypt is actually not a new one. I'm pretty sure that many of you heard of that when the USSR did not let the Jews out of the country during refusnik movement, it was also compared to Egypt and Red Pharaoh. And I know that many of you really supported that movement and helped Soviet Jews to escape, and you have my eternal gratitude for that. So, well, now it's Egypt again. So since I did not like a new pharaoh and I didn't want Russia to turn into Egypt again, naturally I became a political activist, and I was not a leader of any sort, but I did my honest job to bring the downfall of the regime. But instead, I experienced and saw the downfall of the political opposition in Russia. And we worked so hard, but more we tried to achieve liberation, the harder it got. Every so often, new laws would be passed against us, and activities that were completely legal when we started became outlawed, and we turned into criminals, like overnight, though yesterday we were not, and people started to get arrested and sentenced to ridiculous amount of years in jail, like 10, 15, 20 years for just protesting, and that was not an exciting perspective. The fear and stress affected not only our morale, but also our mental health. Like Israelites, instead of supporting each other and showing solidarity in the face of oppression, many people began fighting against themselves and blaming each other for the failures, for our failures. And I saw ravaging depression that was like a plague. Moscow is overall a very kind of depressing city. If you complain about weather in Toronto, just know that Moscow has about 80 sunny days per year. The rest 285 are like this, like clouds and rain. So everyone around me got depressed, and including myself. And finally, after years of battling the oppressive political regime, we came to a point when we lost all hope. And we were really disenfranchised and disjoined and had no mental capacity to take control of the situation. And Russian opposition was completely crushed and remained crushed till this day. It's basically non-existent at this point, and our leadership was beheaded. Some of our leaders were assassinated, some were imprisoned, some forced out of the country. We failed, and we failed completely and utterly. The protests in Moscow of 2011-2013 gathered up to 100,000 people per event, not like altogether, per event, 100,000, 120,000 people would come. When I came to the protest against the invasion of Ukraine in 2014, I found about 50 people there, not 500, 50. And of all the failures of my life, this one is the biggest and the most painful, because all the events that unfolded after that were a result of the destruction of the political opposition in Russia. Well, you might say, well, Rabbi, you can't blame yourself, you're just one person, but I believe that this is kind of what happened to our ancestors in Egypt. They did not believe that they could change anything, because what can one person do? Moshe had the same doubts. He did not believe that he could change anything on his own. And I do believe that what we see in Russia now is an effect of learned helplessness. There are hundreds and thousands, I don't know, maybe a million of honest people who are against the regime, but they don't believe they can bring a change because their spirits are crushed. And that was the war that we lost. But Torah teaches us a lesson, and it's a timeless wisdom. The spirits of the Israelites were crushed, but still they gained their freedom. I think this message is much more powerful than the article that I cited, in the beginning. The Israelites were subjected to physical abuse. It would have been easy for them to give up hope, but they did not. They totally gave up. Instead of saying that Israelites held on to their hope no matter what, Torah describes real people who are not that illusionary strong. When we hear the message that you should never give up no matter what, it's unrealistic and a pathway to learn helplessness. If you fail time after time, but you have this perfectionist and heroic mindset of never giving up, one day you will lose all your strengths and all your hope, because we're just people, not legendary heroes. And Torah shows us just that. Real people with their real problems. So what is the solution? It is to be patient, recognizing that we are in exile, and at some point situation is hopeless, not blaming yourself for losing hope. We lost one battle, maybe several battles, but not the war. And I'm talking now not only about political struggles and opposition, I'm talking about our personal exiles. Each one of us is fighting a battle other people don't know about. It can be a struggle to make a peace with your relatives, or fighting an addiction, trying to escape solitude, find new friends, and trying to improve our health condition or just life condition in general. Inner exile is a prolonged condition that cannot be conquered in one fell swoop, relying only on hope and spirit. We might lose time and again, but just like our ancestors, for our ancestors, God is on our side. We might not be able to hear the message of liberation, but it's not over. Victory is still within our grasp. And I'm wishing all of us to have strength to accept our failures and prevent learned helplessness by changing negative thought patterns and beliefs and developing new coping strategies to deal with challenging situations, and act when we're given the opportunity to do so. Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and please rise for Hatzik.